Hello everybody, welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is Figure Drawing Basics part 121, and today I am going to show you guys something slightly different. It is something that I spoke about, but at this point there's so many episodes I don't remember which episode I talked about it, but here I can go a little bit more in depth. And here it is. It's something to do with pencils. It's it's sometimes fun to play around with mediums. That's one of the things that I really like about traditional work, about working with all these things as opposed to having them be all digital. There's pros and cons to it, of course. Sometimes it's great to just sit down and just draw. Not worry about materials, not worry about any of this stuff like lighting and all this other stuff. Digital is great for that. It's very simple, but there is something that it cannot emulate, which is the experience of feeling all these materials, feeling what each pencil, what the lead feels like in each pencil, what the brush actually feels like when you dip it into the ink and then you apply it onto the paper. It's a sensation that can't be replicated digitally, not just yet. They're slowly coming close. Actually, there's a couple of things that I noticed, surfing the web. There's this new thing that's available now, which is this pad. Basically, it kind of looks like a Wacom tablet, but you clip paper onto it and use a regular pencil. And when you draw on it, you draw on this pad with the paper over it. It actually mimics what you're drawing onto the screen. So you don't even have to look at the screen. You're looking at the paper the entire time. So it just kind of saves you this time of having to scan it or whatever else. It just straight away appears on the screen for you. The only thing is you would have to just like rip out pieces of paper to use it on that pad each and every time, as opposed to having a sketchbook where everything's compiled into like one place. But I imagine at some point that's also going to be different as well. I'm sure they're going to come up with other ways that you could do it. Like, I'm going to say it's going to come to a point where you're going to use something similar to like silicone or something that you would put under, like let's say you would put it under this sketchbook, under this paper, and it's like a mat basically, and then when you draw on it, it would do the same thing. I would imagine that's how close it's going to come to digitizing, I guess, whatever it is that you're working on. But anyways, and there's another thing as well, which is available for iPads, I believe, where you use a brush, but it's specifically for digital stuff. It's not just any brush, unlike the previous device that I was talking about. I don't remember the name of it exactly, but I'm sure this isn't going to be the last time I mention it. You have a specific type of brush, and it actually has bristles on it, and you could use it on an iPad, and you could, or I think it's only limited to an iPad, but when you do, it emulates what brush strokes look like. It has the same texture, and you could see the bristles making their mark on the canvas, which is pretty cool. It's really interesting. I haven't really tried that yet, but I would be curious to see what that's like and what that experience is like. I mean, that's very different from using a Wacom tablet with the nib being like plastic and pretty hard. Anyways, so that's enough about digital stuff. Today I'm talking about traditional stuff, and it has to do with this set right here. This is something that's been sitting for a really long time. As you guys see, I'm using a mechanical pencil. This is like my favorite pencil. I absolutely love the lead here. I love the weight of this pencil. I find it to be really perfect. But here is something that I talked about before, which is the various types of lead. Now, some people want to play around with this stuff. To me, I don't really spend that much time on it. I really want to focus on just getting better, improving my technique, improving my drawings and such. I don't really spend too much time with it, but there is fun to it. As I mentioned, these are mediums you could feel, and this is what this is all about, really. So we got from H4 to 6B, and in the middle it's HB. There is no HB in this set. I'm not really sure why they didn't include it, but HB is like your regular pencil, like your, you know, the typical pencil you would use in school or whatever. That's an HB pencil. And what that is the strength of the lead, basically. So going towards the H side, the lead becomes a lot lighter. You know, even if you press really hard on it, it's still going to come out really light. And I'm going to show you guys these examples. And then going towards the B side, the lead becomes softer, and therefore the marks are really dark. You kind of see it over here. So I'm going to do some quick demonstrations here. This is another one. This isn't one that I used. This is something that I was talking about before. This is just a small drawing pad. This is an excellent quality. I'm not sure if you could find this exact one, but Crescent is very good. Used with all mediums. That's really important to look out for, because you could see that you could use markers, you could use even spray cans on this. You could use a brush, which means like inking and such. And that's because this paper is pretty thick. Now, the way I test the thickness of paper is you kind of flick the tip. When you flick the tip, you could feel the weight of the paper. You know, for this, for example, it's really soft. It's very easy to bend. Whereas you could feel there's more resistance for it to actually wanting to bend. But anyways, this is what makes it so great. You could practice using all sorts of mediums. It's smooth, but it's not too smooth where it's slick almost. And, you know, any marks you make, they kind of smudge off, which is kind of what's going on this paper. This paper is pretty smooth. I'm not using a regular pencil, but as you can see, the regular pencil marks, they come off pretty easily. And I think that has something to do with how slick the paper is. Whereas using this pencil that I have, the blue pencil, it's perfect. It really is versatile on all sorts of paper. The consistency of it is pretty much the same. All right, so yeah, this paper I think is just a good in between. It's not too coarse, it's not too slick. It's pretty good for pencil work. Now this pencil is pretty gross looking, so I'm gonna clean it up and I'm gonna sharpen it a bit. Always hated sharpeners. They suck so bad. I don't know. They always ruin the lead, I feel like. Yeah, look at that. Garbage. I knew that was going to happen, actually. For some reason, I knew that. It's just not going to work. I think this bigger chamber, I thought that the bigger chamber is for sharpening the tip, you know, the lead tip, but that's not the case here. I think it has something to do with different kind of pencil. But look at that. It doesn't do a great job. It like kind of frays the tip. I don't like pencil sharpeners. I would do it traditionally. I would just have like a razor blade. And I think I'm going to do that because I'm getting really frustrated with this. So I don't recommend everybody to do this unless you really know what you're doing here. Just gonna sharpen this edge. And I do have control. That's the other thing that I like about using this a razor blade, is because I have control over how much of the lead I can expose. Whereas with the pencil sharpener, it's like very specific. And then just kind of set it against the paper and just work off the lead. Until I get a nice fine tip that I like. Okay, we're done here. All right, so this is a B pencil. So this is a bit softer than the regular pencil, HB pencil. And what this is right here, why I was bringing this up, is this is excellent for traveling. So if you're serious about getting good, I recommend you guys getting one of these. It doesn't have to be exactly this. This is just a recommendation. The cover is pretty soft. It's pretty thin. So you can use duct tape and just cover it up all around, because you're going to be carrying it around. You're going to be pulling it out. It's going to get tattered after a while. So that's a good way to make sure that the cover kind of stays in place. You could do some tape right in the middle here to keep it all in place. It's going to give it extra protection. But carry it around this with you. It's pretty small. You could fit it in your pocket even. You know, it doesn't even have to be in your book bag if you're not carrying one. But it's small enough to fit in a book bag. It's not heavy. It's really light. And whenever you're on public transportation, let's say you're waiting on something, let's say whatever it is, you have some idle time, you know, you could sit there and actually draw. Just pull it out and practice all these different techniques. So I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to use the B pencil. So this is softer, as I mentioned, as your it's softer than your B pencil, HB pencil. So here I'm going to be practicing shading. I'm going to go from shadows to highlights, but making sure to have a very smooth transition. And I'm not pressing too hard, so notice how shadows are pretty dark. You know, it's not very light, even at this amount of pressure that I'm putting on it, which isn't much at all. So this is an excellent exercise, one for practicing shapes, right? You're practicing how to draw the circle, one of the most important shapes. It is the shape that you start out with when you're drawing the head. And as I mentioned very frequently, if you don't draw it out right, if you don't take the time to actually draw out a perfect circle, the head is going to look weird. It's going to look oblong. And every little detail, if you want to get better and better, every little detail counts. So starting off with something like that is vital, because you're going to be using the head as the unit of measurement for the rest of the body. For those of you who missed out, you guys can check out the early streams. I believe the first 20 to 30 parts to figure drawing basics. I talk about how important the circle is. I give you guys examples of how to use it to measure the body, how to use the head to measure the body, why it's important to use the head as the measurement for the body. And yeah, if you guys do start out with, let's say, an oblong looking head, then it's going to ripple through the rest of the body. I don't know if there's like an example here. Well, I'm going to do a quick one here to just talk about it. So let's say it's an oblong shape. It doesn't really look well. And you learn that the width of the head, width of the body is 3 heads going across, including the shoulders. Now you drew this like oblong looking head, and you're going to use that to measure the width of the body going three heads across. You're going to have a really wide body, and everything is going to be warped because you're going to have to bring it down to the hips. So you're going to have these like really broad shoulders. You're going to use it to measure out other parts, like let's say the width of the arm is supposed to be half a head. So if you're going to draw a line down the middle of a oblong looking head, and then you use it to measure the width of the arm. The width of the arm is going to be really wide on one side and narrow on another. So you want to avoid warping, and you do that by practicing your basic shape. Also, basic shapes are excellent for starting your drawing. And you guys seen this throughout, even up until this this part, the 121st part, I'm still using the same approach by using basic shapes, using the cylinder shape. And as you could see here, the cylinder shape is pretty much the simple form to the body. It's used for the arms. It's even the body itself, the torso itself. It's just a massive cylinder. Used for the legs, all parts of the leg, and used for the neck as well. And even in perspective, you're going to be doing things, not always this frontal view, this flat view of the body. You want to vary things, make things interesting. So you're going to want to draw things in perspective. And to do that, the way to tackle it, start somewhere. What do you do if you don't use the basic shapes? If you don't do the cylinders, you're kind of at a loss, right? You could start out with something, but by the time you get around to closing, let's say you're working on the arm, you recognize like all that detail that you put in, the arm looks weird. It looks warped, so now you have to erase it and do it all over again. Using the basic shapes is a quick technique. It's something that just gives you an opportunity to place things where you want them to be before dedicating yourself to all the detail and then finding out that you made. If you make a mistake, it's easier just erasing something that you've done real quickly, as opposed to spending a lot of time putting in all these intricate lines and details and then having to erase all that. So it's a great way to start your drawing. So you could be, you're using this book to practice all that, and that way when you get faster at drawing these basic shapes, cylinder, the circle, when you start out your own drawing, if you're starting out your own character creation, you could immediately jump to it. The body suddenly becomes less intimidating. You're just constructing it using these shapes that you've practiced over and over and over again. So this book is great for that. You could continuously do it over and over until you can get better. You could do it in all sorts of directions. You could do it slowly going towards the back. This is the front, and now this is the back here. And you could practice shading it. Notice how it's different. It's not, well, in this case, I guess it is top to down. But look at that. This B lead is so soft. So you could only imagine what B6 is going to be like. All right, so that's B2. No, that's B. That's not even B2. So I'm going to do it again. And this time I'm going to be using B2. Now immediately I could feel, it's almost like charcoal, I'm going to say. It starts to almost feel like charcoal. Even the sound of it sounds really different once I start applying it on paper. So it's kind of excellent, I'm going to say, for practicing your sensitivity. Because you can't press it the same way you pressed using the B2 or the B pencil or the HB pencil. You can't use that same amount of pressure, because you're going to get much darker results, and your shade variation is going to be very, very minimal. Basically, it's going to be really dark. The benefit to using B pencils, because they're so soft, they're easy to erase, but they smudge a lot easier because they're so soft. So you're going to see that actually happening as I progress. So this is going to be a B3 pencil. And look at that, I'm not even pressing that hard. And the lines, you could see, are a lot darker. I'm just going to do a light coat with just slight bit of pressure, I'm already getting even darker shade, I'm going to say, than what you're seeing over here. So you have to be very careful. You know, you have to be really light about the way you're using other pencils. So it's great for that. You know, you really do get to practice. So I'm going to press a little bit harder. Look at that. Very slight. It's so soft. And instantly I'm getting much darker results here. I'm going to cover this top here. This is what the dark, like I'm pressing really hard. And look how dark that is. It's ridiculously dark. Well, yeah, I did press a lot harder on it. But you could tell the difference. Like, look at that compared to this. Huge difference. Super dark. All right, moving on. This is B3. Now it's going to be B4. Let me label this actually. So this is B3. This is B2. Is B. Okay, so this is B4. And at this point, I think the lead just becomes a lot softer. It becomes more smudgeable, I'm going to say. So I'm pressing somewhat, a little bit harder. I mean, it's as hard as this, I'm gonna say, in a B3 where that mid-tone is, and I'm getting really dark lines already. So I have to go even lighter on the amount of pressure that I'm putting on a pencil to make sure that my gradients have more variation to them. Now I'm applying a little bit more pressure in the shadow zone, and it's coming out really dark. It's as dark as this, but with just light amount of pressure. And I'm going to press really hard just so you guys can see what that brings out from a B4. All right, so this is a B4. I'm going to do B5. Can't imagine how much harder this is going to be. Let's see, what's an interesting, more exaggerated cylinder shape. Yeah, it just feels softer. I'm gonna say the the dark shadows, the really dark shadows, are starting to look less different from one another. I mean, in comparison to B, B2, B3. You know, B4, I think, and B5 are closer in range. Now I'm going to press a lot harder into shadow zone. I'm going to say pencils that are in this like B5 zone are good for smudging. Like, let's say if you're, you know, the type when you're drawing and you want to see how easy it starts to form on the finger. Whereas if I was to do it with, well, actually, I guess they're all kind of soft. But it's just a matter of like how much pressure you have to put on paper in order to get like dark shadows. So as you creep up towards B6, the pressure becomes lighter and lighter in order to achieve those dark shadows. Alright, so that's B5. But you could even see in like this writing right here how much softer the B5 is. Okay, now B6. And I think another good way of noticing it as well is like when you're sharpening the lead and how easily it crumbles, basically. If you guys are attempting to use the razor blade, be extremely careful. This stuff is super sharp. But yeah, I could easily just pick off this, like, the tip area if it's getting covered by the pencil itself. The lead is getting covered, but yeah, it's really easy to sharpen the lead because it's so soft. All right, so this is a B6. So I'm going to do a B6 now. Notice how I'm creating the cylinder shape. I'm still using circles, right? So like one big circle for where the front is going to be, and this is going to be the back or the bottom of it. Also, pay attention to how the lines form. Like, you see how grainy that is in comparison to this? That has to do with the softness of the lead. You know, it becomes more and more like charcoal the higher you go up in the B section. Not even pressing that hard, and I'm getting these really dark shadows here. I'm just making it as smooth of a transition from shadows to highlights. So that's a B6. Man, look at that. I'm just trying to brush off and it smudges. It's very easily it very easily comes off paper. Comes off the paper. All right, so that's the B's basically. So now I'm gonna go for the H's. It looks like I have to do a little bit more sharpening. See, like that is really annoying right there. And there's barely any way to go around that when it comes to sharpeners. Like it covers up the lead and you just have to work with that. Not a big fan of sharpeners. Pencil sharpeners. And I kind of like the look of it too. I think it looks cool when you sharpen it manually like this. Making sure that it's even all around at the tip. One of the most annoying things is like when you're drawing with these regular pencils and then one side has the pencil covering the lead and then it just starts to like because the lead becomes so short, you just start drawing with the wooden part. I hate that. That's one of the reasons why I like to just clean off that and make sure that it's the same all around. Okay, so now I'm gonna move on. This is H, so I'm gonna put H here, and it's a pretty good amount of pressure on there. Like I'm not super light about it. There's definitely more resistance in the lead. I'm gonna press harder, much harder than any of the B's to get some shadows. And even pressing that hard, it's nowhere near as dark as that, or even that. But it's not as grainy, I'll say that. Like you see how grainy this looks? This has much more of a smooth feel. Okay, so that's your H. Now I'm gonna move on to 2H. Now it goes all the way up to 4H, but that should be all right. Yeah, like see how easily it smudges? I wonder if there's more than 4H. Like if this, as you saw, it goes up to B6 for the B side, but for H it only goes up to H4. I wonder if that's the limit. I'm pretty sure it's not. Sure, if you go to some stores, art stores, they'll have some H6s. So I think H pencils are good for coarse paper. So if you're drawing, let's say, on really coarse paper, textured paper, and you're using a soft pencil, I can't even like begin to picture what that feels like. It's probably really frustrating. I'm not a fan of it. But if you're using like an H pencil, for example, then it doesn't matter because there's resistance already. You know, it's stronger lead. So you're not going to get as grainy results as you would if you were to use an HB or any of the Bs. So 2H, lots of resistance there in order for me to get dark shadows. Because I have to really press hard. And because I'm pressing so hard, right, it's leaving a mark on the paper itself. Like all of this is drawn on the surface, but the harder the lead is, it starts to make an indentation into the paper. So if you were to erase it, let's say you erase it completely, you would still see like the grooves in the paper because I had to press so hard. Whereas with the HBs, you don't have to do that. Or the Bs, rather, you wouldn't get any of that. It may be a little smudgy, but still a lot easier to erase. So that's an H2. Now, moving on to an H3. I don't want to spend too much time. Whoa, it's already like most of the stream is gone. I guess I won't get too much done when it comes to drawing. I'm going to be doing more hands. But I figured this would be fun. This is something new. And it's also encourage you guys to try this stuff out. Now, with this is an H3 or 3H or whatever. I'm going to do just H3. With this, there's noticeable amount of resistance. And as you could see, like in comparison, even to this, how much smoother the transition is for the shading. Like it's not as grainy. So I'm gonna start pressing harder to get some shadows in there. And this is pretty hard. Like I'm pressing pretty hard on the pencil, and look at how light that is. That is nowhere near that shade. And I do remember this actually. I was using these kind of pencils when I was doing a huge portrait. I'm gonna say it was like the height was at least 20 inches and the width was like 35, I'm gonna say. That's just an estimate. I think it was a little bit bigger maybe. But I do remember having to switch pencils for these kind of reasons. Like the paper itself wasn't like a middle ground. It wasn't smooth. It was kind of coarse. So there were points where I had to switch and use something like an H pencil in order to get like smoother sort of shadows forming. And then I would use like a B pencil and create like the shadows, the dark shadows, and just kind of move through those. But yeah, just take a look. You know, this is super hard. Like in the area where the darkest shadows will be for this example, I'm pressing really hard and it's still nowhere close. And even if I go around it, see, it doesn't smudge off as easily. There's more resistance to it. So you kind of have to think about it yourself, you know, what you're doing, depending on what you're doing, what kind of paper you have, and what sort of result you want. You have to think for yourself and say like, okay, maybe I should use these other types of pencils. But I do like the results actually. I mean, I like this paper. This paper, as I mentioned very frequently, it's excellent quality. But I do like the results of this 3H kind of. It's very smooth. You know, as you could see, the transitions are not even as with an H2 or like a B pencil. You could see how grainy that texture is, whereas here, it's a lot smoother. And so it also really depends on the style that you're aiming for. Like some people like that. Some people really like that like grainy sort of texture. Other people are shooting for like hyper realistic, so they would need a lot more of a finer transition for shadows. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time on that one. And this is going to be the final one before I return to more figure drawing. This is an H4. So H4. I'm going to say slightly different. It's barely noticeable. The resistance on it is almost the same. So yeah, with the H lead, any of the H lead, you get more finer lines, whereas the B leads really start to expand and thicken and get much darker. As you can see, like, look at how different that is. Look at a B6 to an H4. And I'm pressing really hard in shadow zone, and it's nowhere near as dark as this right here. It might even have a different effect if you combine the two, which is what I'm going to do right after this. But yeah, with like this H4, I can get a lot more gradients coming in. Smoother, much smoother shadow transition. Okay, so that pretty much does it. I'm going to work a little bit here to just see how mixing them would really work. So I'm combining the hard lines of the H with the B6. And as you can see, it already fills in a lot of the gaps that the B6 couldn't make, or couldn't fill rather. It's just too soft, so it started to take the texture of the paper. It started to show more of the texture of the paper. Whereas because there's resistance for the H lead, it really gets in between all the little crevices, I guess, of this textured paper. So you could see it's like a really smooth transition now in comparison to what it was before. You guys can skip back to just compare and see if you notice the difference there. But yeah, that's immediately much smoother. So you could combine the two. You know, it really helps. I think the biggest takeaway is it really helps with the kind of paper that you have. Which kind of like, it makes me think now, you know, I have all these old sketchbooks that I have with a lot of free pages that haven't been drawn on. I'm wondering, like, should I go back and fill up all those pages using these H pencils and really utilize all that paper? Anyway, so that pretty much does it, everybody. Just wanted to give you guys that preview. I thought it would be something fun to do for a change. This isn't really that expensive. I'm gonna say, well, I got this a really long time ago, so before all this insane corruption that bubbled up with inflation and all that other stuff. So I'm gonna say this was probably like $11, if even. This is super old. I'm gonna say this is at least 12 or 13 years old, and I just never use it. I just use mechanical pencil at all times, so it's sitting there. I might, as I mentioned, I might just like venture into my old sketchbooks that have different kind of paper and see what the results are going to be. But highly encourage you guys to get one of these small pads, carry it around with you whenever you have an opportunity. Draw, practice all this stuff, practice shading. You really want to get your hand flexible. You know, you want to get it in, you want to warm up. You know, it's something that I talk about very frequently, similar to the idea of going to the gym. You know, you want to, before you start lifting heavy weights, and in the analogy, heavy weights would be like really complicated drawings, you want to loosen up, you know, get ready for it. Make sure that you're able to have your muscles be flexible enough to take on all that heavy lifting. So same thing here. You want to loosen up. You want to make sure that you're hand is flexible enough to make all these different lines, and your focus is ready. You know, you got into the rhythm of that, and that's going to make it easier for you to approach a drawing. So I'm going to start something quick. See how much of it I can get done before the next stream, which is going to be the project stream. This is going to be dicey. Maybe I should just do a different... Yeah, I'm going to do a different one. I'm going to do one right here. Or should I do it here? I'm going to do it here. So I'm using basic shapes to once again set the parameters. Paying attention to the space between objects. So for example, this finger right here, where does it end on the thumb? Was it more inwards or more outwards? And I'll give you guys a better understanding of that once I give this more definition. I'm kind of drawing through the fingers to make sure that the line is straight. It really does line up. I really enjoyed that H lead, actually. I liked how smooth it felt on the paper. I'm gonna see if, because I think I do have some like mechanical pencil lead that also varies. So I'm going to see if I still got some H. Stashed away somewhere. making sure to be careful about the fingernails, very important. You can make the fingers look flat if you don't draw it properly in perspective. So what I was talking about earlier before, recognizing the space between objects. So, drawing this section of the finger, is it supposed to be further down at the thumb or further up? That's something to look out for. And that's a technique that's really, really useful no matter what you're doing. If you're learning anatomy, it's excellent for that because you get to recognize its proper placement for whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's parts of the face, parts of the hand. It allows you to recognize that detail and keep it in mind next time you come across it. I'm going to do a couple of more details here, and then I'm going to call it a night, ladies and gents, for figure drawing basics, and get ready for the next stream, which is going to be the project stream. I'm going to be doing some digital oil painting, something that I haven't done in a while. I'm working on this painting that I started years ago. It's a study of Jacques-Louis David. He's one of my favorite painters. So I'm going to be continuing on with that. In just a few, I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break. If you guys did enjoy this content, you found it to be fun, interesting, helpful, whatever it is, just remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They're both greatly appreciated by yours truly. And I'll see you guys in the next stream. Oh, and before I go, for those of you who aren't going to be tuning in, make sure you remember this Friday and Wednesday, even this coming Wednesday, tomorrow and Friday, there are going to be some special streams. So Friday, something you could expect, it's going to be continuation of Gil Elfgren's influences. I'm going to be talking about, I guess, one more artist. So I got like 1.5 more artists to go. And that's going to be it for the influences. And I'm going to be showing you guys the book where this all originated from. So that's going to be this Friday, and then this Wednesday, tomorrow, there's going to be a special intro, so make sure you tune in then to check out what it is. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next stream. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is the project stream. This is part 80. And here is what I'm going to be working on today. It's a continuation of one of my favorite paintings by Jacques-Louis David. It is called The Death of Socrates. It's an old story about a philosopher who questioned everything. In fact, he was responsible for what is now known as the Socratic method, which is questioning things to find out the truth. So endless questions in order to eventually arrive to some sort of conclusion, or to really dig deep and find the true meaning behind something, or discover something new, Anyways, the story goes that he was questioning authority, he was questioning a lot of people who considered themselves to be knowledgeable, only to find out that they're not really that knowledgeable about what they're talking about, and they're just kind of spreading around a lot of bullshit. And that didn't sit well with a lot of people. A lot of people got infuriated. They reported him to the Republic, basically, at the time. And the Republic didn't take kindly to what he was talking about, what he was saying, that he was questioning all these things that have been put into place as law. And he was waking up a lot of people, basically, by questioning all this stuff. And that created a lot of problems. So they told him, look, you either cut it out, or you're going to be punished by death, basically. And he said, well, if it's a life that I cannot question, it's a life not worth living. And here you see him. Well, actually, let me show you the original, because this is my study. This is the original here, and he is surrounded by all the people who admired him, who followed him, who studied with him. And you got one of the most famous ones, Plato, all the way at the left side, sitting on what looks like a brick, I guess, by the bedside, and just kind of taking in what is going on now. They're going to lose a friend, they're going to lose a mentor, I guess, to this unfortunate and stupid reality. So one of them is giving Socrates, who's in the middle, the cup of hemlock, which is poison. There's a lot more on it. It's actually really interesting. Socrates is also a very interesting character, so I encourage you guys to do a little digging and find out more. But I absolutely love this painting. I had the opportunity to see it at the Met in New York. Huge painting, and incredible amount of work in there. Like, just zooming it in, I think you could even see so by, like, this is a really good photo, and you could just see how, even really zoomed in, just how much there's going on over there, with all these folds, and how much variation there is in color and tone. That's absolutely incredible. I really like how he paints skin. Like he captures like all the different shades there as well. Like you could see that bluish purple sort of by the ankles there, and around the toes there's like, I guess, more vibrance there. Towards the tips, I think that's really unique. He captures like all the skin tones so well, blends them in so well. There's some reds, there's some yellows and oranges and whites. Really, really well done. And of course, paying attention to all these little folds as well. But just how he renders skin is incredible. Especially using oils. You know, oil is really complicated, and knowing how to mix those colors well together to create such an excellent result. He was one of the best painters of that time period. But yeah, you could see just zoomed in how much detail there is, how much there's going on. What the expressions are like, the body language. And also these characters and back over here. So it's a really cool photo, actually, well done, high quality photo, but it's still nothing like actually being at the museum and looking at this piece of work. And it's cool to be in a presence of something that's old. Like this is probably 1800s, late 1800s, maybe late 1700s. But just to be in a presence of something, and it's the remains of the artist, basically. It's not a conglomeration of artists that created this. It's one artist, and it's his brushstrokes, and it's still his presence through those brushstrokes, you know, that lives on to modern day. And there's nothing that there hasn't been much that changed in a painting. I don't know if they've done any like retouching or if they've added protective layers or something, but even then, like majority, for the most part, I mean, all of it is just his work, you know. So he's still present to this day. So it's kind of cool to be in a presence of it, you know, just being there. You're it's kind of like this time warp, you know. You're existing in modern day, but at the same time, the past of the 1800s or 1700s is there with you in modern day. It's weird. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a pretty trippy experience. It's one of the reasons why I really love going to the museums, because it is kind of like, you know, traveling back in time a little bit, or being in a presence of the past. So anyways, enough about that. I'm continuing on with it today. I'm going to be doing more digital oil painting. I'm actually really enjoying what the texture is like. Coming from Clip Studio Paint. I didn't think it would be as good, actually. I started this back when I had Photoshop. I didn't even use Clip Studio Paint, and I remember I had to create brushes in order to emulate what oil painting is like. So now that I took a break, I could actually notice some mistakes, mistakes when it comes to the angle of certain things. Now I really want to create as much of, like, get it down as close to the original as possible. Like, that's kind of the goal here. I want to train my hand-eye coordination. I want to train my attention to detail and really refine my my ability to see it. So I don't want to compromise. I don't want to be like, well, that's close enough. You know, I really want to get things down to the nitty-gritty details even. So I suspect this is going to take me some time, and it's something that I might have to invest. I think this is just yeah, it's gonna take a bit. If I'm just doing it on stream, it's gonna take a while, so I gotta find some extra time, which is what the problem really is, to be able to tackle it off stream and get more done. There's just so much. But I think I thought about this today actually, and I think what I'm going to be doing is just getting as much of it done as possible all around. You know, I don't want to spend too much time perfecting Play-Doh, for example. I'm just going to start moving on to other parts of the painting and refining it, because as you can see, there's quite a bit to go. Like, there's Socrates himself, there's like all the details for the bricks as well that I'm going to be doing. And each of those characters, they also have so much detail, especially when it comes to their hair and such. So I'm just going to keep moving on, keep moving through it until everything is pretty much in place, and then just adjust things as I go to get things going. Because otherwise it just feels like I'm forever going to be working on one person. You know, as I mentioned, taking a break allows you to come back and look at it with fresh eyes, you know, as if you're looking at it for the very first time. Because as you're painting, your eye, or drawing even, your eye just gets used to certain things. I want to say it's kind of similar to something like smell. Like there are certain things that you get used to smelling and that only other people are able to recognize. Like, there's been times where I went to people's houses and I would smell a certain thing, and I would ask them about it, and they're like, oh, I don't smell anything. And then surely enough, if I spend enough time there, it's not as potent as when I first started, when I first came in. So it kind of works the same way with like drawing. You just get used to seeing certain things, and then your eye just kind of gets used to it, and you miss out on little details here and there. But then when you take a break, you know, you step away, or even if you use like certain techniques, like there are certain techniques that a lot of artists use, which is if it's digital, they flip the canvas. You know, they flip it. I'm gonna do it real quick actually. I kind of wonder what that's gonna do. So I'm gonna flip it horizontally. And that kind of snaps people out of that mode, and it brings it back to like the same fresh perspective. Actually a different way of doing it. Yeah, now I can see the whole image. And if you're working off of a reference, you want to do that with the reference as well. So you want to flip both of them in the same direction. And that will kind of like give you some perspective, and you can be like, oh, there's this that's off, there's this, that, and the other. It's looking all right. You know, I'm sure if I spent enough time analyzing the differences, I could notice it. But for now, I'm gonna say it's okay, and I'm gonna just move on to other features on Play-Doh. Like, I've yet to define his feet, I've yet to define his hands, and all these folds. I actually did some surgery last time, so now I gotta like redefine these folds. I'm not gonna worry about the color as much. Alright, so flippity flip. flip it back to where it was. Some chains here. I still find it so insane that that's what people would do back in the day for such things. I mean, it's still happening now. It's absurd on what's going on now. Like in Iran especially, there were some people who were hung. Like, who does that? It's like medieval times or something, and people are bringing that back. Which just shows how crazy the people who are in control are. And they've become so delusional. You know, they've become so immune to any sort of repercussion. And the fact that they have so much money just made them sociopathic. Like, they just don't care about repercussions don't matter to them because they know they could buy themselves out of anything. You know, so it brings about this like sociopathic sort of behavior, and a lot of it is delusion as well. You know, they're just doing things, and it's as if though they're living in some sort of movie, playing with people's lives, hanging them, beating people for protesting. I mean, I've also been on a Game of Thrones binge. I've just been rewatching that series. Absolutely love it. It's so much fun. But there was, at the very beginning, the first episode where Ned Stark offs one of the Watchers, I guess, one of the Watchers. He offs their head because they abandoned their post, and I was like, man, that's so savage. That's such an insane thing to murder somebody where they don't know what's going to happen. You know, is it really reasonable to send somebody into, or to just completely to kill them, knowing that they might not have another chance to experience life? You know, they might not have a chance to live again. So that was it. Was that punishment actually just? You know, to off somebody because they abandoned their post. That's absurd. Maybe like a child murderer, right? Or a child rapist. Like, absolutely, I wouldn't be like, poor guy, you know, he's never gonna... That's a crazy person. It's disgusting what they've done. They knew that they were doing something that really was awful. They chose that. So I'm a little bit less sympathetic when it comes to that. But for like abandoning your post, not wearing a hijab, you know, not wearing some sort of clothing, and then you murder somebody for that, you're absolutely a crazy person. Like, those people need to be booted and never given any sort of authority on action or anything to do with like people or their lives or anything like that. There's a bunch of mental patients running the world around. You know, there's people who like literally are mentally sick. They have some sort of neurological disorder. And I don't think that it's only like, I don't think it's like some sort of condition, you know, that's inherent or something. I mean, there's definitely that as well. That's definitely present, but I think people can develop it from not checking themselves, not recognizing what the reality is. As I mentioned, like, becoming incredibly rich, I think makes people very delusional. And it's not about being rich. That's the problem. It's the fact that people don't recognize value anymore of anything. You know, this idea of thinking that they're completely immune because they have something that everybody wants, which is money. You know, they could basically do whatever they want. So is it really the money, or is it the person has always been susceptible to corruption? You know? Is it the fact that society values money so much that whoever gets it, society kind of enables them because they're at awe at the fact that they're so rich and successful, and the fact that, you know, there's that in play that enables them to continue to behave like psychos. So yeah, I don't really think that it's only like inherent disorder. That's something that comes from their parents. I think it also can be enabled by society. It could be enabled by the choices that people make in order to do that. I mean, this is a perfect painting to represent that in a sense. There's somebody who's living their life, is very clever, is very thought-provoking, and because of that, he was sentenced to death. Like, they killed him for it. That's insane. That's a crazy person thing to do. And I think people really have to start thinking about that more, you know, this idea of like, what is sane and what's insane? You know, if we're gonna lock up a person for murdering somebody, right? Why aren't we locking up someone who is creating genocides? Like one person killing one person, or one person killing millions of people? What's worse? You know, like, I don't think, if people are going to be outraged, you know, there's like this whole like Jeffrey Dahmer thing where everybody's like, oh, what a fucking horrible person, this is insane, and blah 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 blah. Without a doubt, of course, you know, that person was, but what they're claiming to be insane and disgusting and horrible is the fact that they were committing these awful things, murdering people, for pleasure, you know, for whatever it was, whether it was pleasure or whether it was power, right? They thought that they were doing some sort of godly work, you know, so that's part of being crazy. That's part of being delusional. And that's the same reason that you see these politicians doing it. They think they're doing some godly work, or they think that they're godly, you know, that they're these God-given gifts to society, and the choices they make are infallible, and therefore it's not wrong. It's the same sort of symptoms, same level of insanity, except one person is killing much less people. You know, like the Jeffrey Dahmer types, they're killing much less than as opposed to these political war criminals, these people who are enabling war crimes. Like, for example, Charles Manson, right? He didn't commit the crimes. He told people to do it. So what's the difference between him and somebody who's like a politician and he's telling people to go and bomb cities and murder people? You know, what's the difference between that and somebody who's telling people, go back to work and catch a killer virus and kill yourself so that I can make more money? My company can make more money, or my friends can make more money. That sounds crazy to me. Sounds like a psycho. But if nobody keeps them in check, right? If like people aren't recognizing it and saying like, hey, that's crazy. Like, get this guy out of there. And instead people are like, well, he has a lot of money, so I guess it's okay. You know, that's That's also a little bit crazy. What kind of reasoning is that? That's ridiculous. I think people really have to start paying attention to these things, because it shapes the future. It shapes what becomes normal, in a sense, what becomes loud. And then if more people start to do those things, like, well, if it's normal to do that, then I can do this, and then they start doing things. And then before you know it, there's going to be another pandemic, because people are going to be doing more and more crazy stuff. That's going to create diseases that's going to create more wars that create more diseases. Like, if you think about the stuff that people had to eat during some of these wars in history, it was awful. Like, people were getting sick left and right. And I think in a lot of cases, one of my theories is, when it comes to wars, is that it's just another way of downsizing population while also profiting from those wars. So there are people who are just saying, you're fighting for our country, but what they're really saying is like, hey, we're trying to get rid of people here, go out there and make us money with these wars. Then they label them heroes, and of course we see what they do with heroes. They just give them diseases instead of raises. So it's not so much that they actually care and they're proud. It's just this agenda that they have. And if you just do a little bit of digging and see like what sort of food people were given at the time, how they were treated, they didn't care. They were basically there to die for other people's profits, for other people's egos. That's what a lot of these other ones are, these soldiers are doing. They're killing themselves off for other people's egos. It's not because, they're protecting somebody. That person isn't even anywhere close to the battle zone or having to deal with any of the dangers that come with it. They're sitting comfortably in their rich mansions, doing all sorts of disgusting stuff. To the economy, to the people, to whatever. While these poor kids, basically, because they're usually in their like 20s or late teens or whatever, are going off and killing themselves, coming back with less limbs. And what do they get for it? Nothing. Some stupid title that doesn't even help them create a better future for themselves, and a bunch of PTSD. And they're going out there and they're murdering strangers. Like, it's not like they know these kids that they're killing. There's nothing, like, they're completely completely unaware of who the person is in a plane, who the person is in a car, who the person is on the bridge, and they just off them. So it's a mental sickness. It's something, as I mentioned, that can come from conditioning, that can come from interaction, how they're being treated, what they're being told, and instantly that shifts people's behaviors. So we got to think about it. What's the difference between Charles Manson, for example, and these political war criminals, and these like politicians who are doing this to society, basically? What's the difference there? I don't see much of it, aside from the fact that politicians are committing even worse crimes. And it's something that's known in psychology. There's been a test that kind of like examined this phenomenon, and has to do with like people being susceptible to authoritarian sort of behavior. It's called the Milgram experiment. It's an actual experiment that happened back in the day where they had a bunch of people come in. I'm guessing that they were paid for it. You know, it's one of the things where they were saying like, okay, if you conduct this, we're gonna give you X amount for doing it. You just have to follow these instructions. So they got a bunch of people in. They sat them down in this office. And it wasn't like these people were who hired them to do it, that they were like well trained and they were professionals or any of that sort of thing. And that's one of the reasons why this experiment ended up being what it was, is that they just had these regular people come in and they were just carrying clipboards that didn't even have anything written on them. They were wearing white lab coats, and they sat down the people, the volunteers, and they said, okay, so we got one person in one room, in the other room rather, and every time you press this button, they're going to receive a shock, a certain level of shock. So we need you to press this button. So the person would look at them apprehensively, and then they would do it. They would press the button, and then they would hear on the other side a scream. Now, there wasn't really anybody there. It was just somebody who was like, pretending to feel pain, and they were screaming, or they had some sort of recording or something. One of those things. Anyways, it wasn't real. The experiment wasn't real. But it sounded like it. There was no way for the person to verify. They didn't know that's what was going to happen when they sat down to do it. So then they would say, okay, well, we need to up the voltage now. And they would up the voltage, and they would be like, okay, we need you to press a button again. And then the person would, just kind of apprehensively like look and be like, are they okay? And it's like, well, we just need you to do this. So please press the button. And then the person would go and they would press the button, and then the scream would get louder. And they're like, okay, so now we need to up the voltage again, and you deliver that shock. And the person would be like, well, is it going to be safe? And they're like, well, it's really important that you just deliver this shock. So please press the button. And then the person would go and they would press the button again. And this time the scream was like agony. Like the person sounded like they were in total agony. But because of this, this idea that there's a person standing there and they're presenting themselves to be professional because of their appearance, because of what they were wearing. They were wearing a lab coat, and they also had this clipboard, so that meant that they knew what they were doing, when that wasn't the case at all. So you could see how Socrates would have been really useful in this scenario, and they would question all these things like, hey, what kind of profession do you have? Like, is this person going to be okay? Are you sure that this is safe? And just incessantly continue to question until they get an answer. But instead, a lot of them would just press the button, and have that shock delivered to the person on the other side. Person, quote unquote, on the other side. Some people actually walked away from it. There were some people who were like, no, I'm not doing it. This is ridiculous. The smart people who actually had a conscience that said like, hey, that's more important to me than whatever this person's trying to achieve. Like, I don't want to continuously deliver something that could end up being fatal and killing this person. I don't want that. I don't want to be responsible for that. I don't want to be the person to do it. But a lot of other people were just doing as they were told, despite of what the repercussions of it would be, or like what the results would be of it. They didn't question it. But that's kind of like what's going on, basically. It's the Milgram experiment that's happening in all these countries where people are going out and bombing places. They're actually dropping bombs, as opposed to being like, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, staging something and pretending as if though that was done, or something is wrong, or whatever it is. Like, recognizing like, hey, it's not them. It's not these politicians who are telling me to do it who are killing these people. It's me. I'm the one who's going out there. I'm pulling the trigger. I'm pressing the button and, bombing these places. So if like people recognize that they're in control of themselves, that there are people who have a conscience and just not do it, we would have much better world conditions. Like wherever you are, whatever country you're in, it's not the politicians who are pulling the trigger, it's the people, the soldiers, And it's an ego boost for those nut jobs, because they're like, look at how influential I am. I could tell somebody to go and kill others, and they'll do it. It's sickness. Tell me that doesn't sound like a sick, insane person. That's like a Manson, basically. Charles Manson right there. And a lot of these people end up looking at as like a presidency an opportunity to kill and be okay. They're like, oh, if I wanted to murder, I just have to become a president. If I wanted to get off on murders, if I wanted to get off on killing people or torturing and abusing people, I have to become president. And that's such an insane thing. Like, that's what you do with your achievement, rather than really creating a new society that is progressive and functioning and, figuring out how to deal with problems in a progressive way, as opposed to like murdering a bunch of people. Yeah, wild stuff, man. This is why I believe that money doesn't belong in politics. Like, I'm not saying don't live in a monetary society. Like, I think a monetary system is needed, but once again, I don't think capitalism is the be-all, end-all for monetary systems. It's a monetary system. It's just like a branch of things. It's similar to like art. If you're gonna say art, you're not gonna it doesn't mean everything. It's just like painting is part of art. Playing music is part of art. So just substitute those things. Like the monetary system is basically this concept of art. And what you choose, let's say music, just as an example, would be like a capitalism, and poetry would be like communism, so they're just branches of a political system. So the same way as capitalism is a branch of monetary system. So yeah, if it's not capitalism, it doesn't mean that all monetary systems are bad. Or it's either a monetary system or it's socialism or everything is free, basically. No, there's other monetary systems that can be used instead. Progressive monetary systems that have accountability, have limitations to what you could do with money. Just because you have it doesn't mean you could do whatever you want. That sort of system, a system that takes into account the environment, takes into account social structure, how people interact with each other, what that's like. It shouldn't, instead of like what capitalism does, is basically like if you have money, you could say, do, and act however you feel like. It doesn't matter. You don't have to take into account any of those things. You don't have to think about the environment. You don't have to think about how you treat people. You don't have to think about the future of anything other than yourself. Like, that's basically capitalism for you. And it proved itself to be unsustainable for a very long time now. And it's just creating destruction. It's just creating wars. It's just creating more problems, as opposed to solving any of them. It's not there for solving anything. It's just there to make people rich. And that's pretty much it. And that's not It's not a sustainable system. That's not a system that's going to perpetuate civilization. It's actually just going to bring it closer and closer towards complete destruction. Considering all that stuff, as you could see, just people doing whatever they want, saying whatever they want, and everybody praising them because they're like, oh, he has money, he's successful. Oh, he's rich. That means they know what they're doing. It's so crazy. There's a bunch of people who got rich from doing awful things. Sex trafficking, drug trafficking. They get a bunch of money and they move on to doing other things that are also awful, and they get people positions to do things to protect their interests while having things veiled, pretending as if though they don't do any of those things behind closed doors. Like perfect examples like Groucho Marx and Weinstein, like all those characters, like they're doing disgusting, terrible things behind closed doors. But prior to that, everybody's praising them, thinking that these are amazing people, and they did it through hard work and, did things the right way or whatever else. Meanwhile, they're doing all this like disgusting, terrible stuff behind closed doors. And people are like, well, why are things so terrible? Because a lot of people, instead of like rising up against it and demanding new systems, demanding new change in laws and regulations, and people who are in power, they're enabling it by praising it, by going along with it, instead of revolting. Making excuses and being like, well, you got to grow up sometime, and that's just a way to alleviate their sense of responsibility, or the fact that they failed to take any action. So the way they pacify themselves is like, well, I guess I grew up and I stopped thinking about those things and making them important. And that's why the pandemic happened, because a lot of people just chose to use that excuse, or bought into that excuse that was laid on them through like fascists, basically a bunch of people who wanted that corruption, who wanted those kind of things to happen, and they knew how to creep into people's minds psychologically and make them feel powerless to do anything, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's generational for sure. And as I mentioned, it's not like these are teenagers who are telling these adults to go out there and do all these things and believe in these fascist values and racist points of views and all that stuff. It's adults. Adults are doing that to kids. Adults are telling them to behave this way. Adults are the ones who are creating sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and all this other stuff. So, who really needs to grow up there? I don't think that age means somebody's wiser. It doesn't really. It just means like a person who is wise is wiser. A person who chooses to follow reason and logic and not just talk about it, not just preach it to other people, but actually follow it themselves, be that example. Those are the wiser people. There's Nazis who are like 50, 60 years old. Does that make them right because they're older? Absolutely not. That's just kind of like the example there. It just comes down to education and moral values, if you have any. If you do actually have any values that you follow. Not just preach, because it's a lot easier for people to point the finger than it is to actually look at themselves and be like, hey, do I actually follow any of the things that I am condemning others for? Or am I just an insane hypocrite? Which is basically like the right wing, insane hypocrites. And it's not just in the States, it's like every country. Notice every country has this sort of dichotomy. There are people who share those kind of things, right? Like whether it's India or China or America or Africa or whatever, Italy or France, they have people who very much act like what in the States people would say right-wingers are. So isn't that fascinating? The fact that all these countries claim to be so different from one another and criticize each other, but they have very similar social structure. China being an authoritarian country, right? They're having a dictatorship, basically, and people are in the States criticizing China and being like, oh, they're so blah, 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 and that country has like a dictatorship. Meanwhile, there's an entire party that acts just like the dictatorship that's over there, that wants to create scenarios and behaviors and, having zero accountability while demanding it from everybody. Talking about corruption, meanwhile doing a bunch of corrupt things themselves. And to me, that just says there's something else in play here. It's not about nationality. It's not about geographical location. It's not about any of those things. It has to do with psychology. I think a lot of it has to do with something I call brat syndrome. Like, I think it's something that really develops at a young age. If you think about kids who escape responsibility, right? When they lie to their parents and they get away with it, what do? They laugh about it, right? There's a little bit of glee there that they're so happy that they got away from the responsibility. They were able to fool their parents. The better they get at that, the more and more crazy their behavior becomes. They start pushing the limitations. What if I do this? Am I going to get away with it? And then they get away with it and they, again, just like kid, laugh about it. So that brings on sociopathic behaviors. And it gets worse and worse and worse as they get older. The more things that they start doing, knowing that they could get away with this, they can get away with that, so on and so forth. And if nobody's there to check it, nobody's there to say, like, no, you're not getting away with this. Like, I've noticed that I don't care how much money you got. You're going to jail for doing this stuff. If you don't care about anybody other than yourself, there are repercussions, guys. Everybody else wants to also enjoy themselves, and you're just stomping that out for the sake of this like mental disorder of how much you can get away with. But anyways, that personality is present everywhere. There are a bunch of people who have that sort of upbringing or who have that sort of environment. Kids who always got their way. And when they don't get their way, they throw temper tantrums and they freak the fuck out and they do some crazy stuff in order to get their way. They end up being adults. If nobody checks them or teaches them how to respect people's boundaries, how to appreciate others or whatever. It's not like they snap out of it. One day they're just like, oh wait, I shouldn't do that anymore. No, they've been doing it for so long that all they're focusing on is like, hey, can I get away with more stuff? Oh, I'm good at lying now because I've been doing it for so many years. What can I get away with when I'm doing this or that? Yeah, so I call that brat syndrome. They turn into brats, and it gets worse and worse as they get older. And they do crazier and crazier things. And then they become presidents, and then they create wars, and they laugh about the fact that they were able to convince people, lie and manipulate them to go out and murder others all around the world. They're creating all this stuff that's rippling through around the world, and they laugh about it. Just like a kid who gets away with a bunch of stuff that their parents told them not to do. So I'm absolutely convinced that that's what's going on around the world. Why there's these similarities? Why are places that deem themselves to be so different having the same sort of personalities around there? In India, it's the same idea. There's a bunch of people who are acting the same way. They call themselves conservatives. But then if you pay attention to what they're doing, they're completely contradicting any of the things that they condemn others for, what they abuse others for. Same exact behavior. Different country, right? Different culture, supposedly. Same sort of behavior. So it's not about nationality, it's not about culture, it has to do with this sort of thing that happens psychologically to kids with specific type of upbringing, specific type of environments. And I think it's multiple. I don't think it's just that, the kids who are lying through their entire life and getting away with it and getting good at it. I think there's multiple avenues. So there's kids who are brought in really abusive environments, and because of that they pass it on to other people, which allows them to keep stomping on everybody around until they get what they want, the same way the parents treat them. So there's that avenue. There's like multiple avenues in order to get to that state, get to that psychological deformity, I want to say. Like, that's probably not the right term for it, but yeah, so it's not just one avenue to get there. There's other ways that people develop this brat syndrome, basically. There's people who develop it through trauma, where they become so traumatized that they start doing terrible things to others as a choice, because that's just how they've been. That's how they've been treated, so they're just like, either I treat others this way and prevent it, or I end up being in that position, so that's another route that brings about that psychosis, basically. I think it's a psychosis. It's not just, and it could be genetic as well. Some people are just genetically predisposed to be that way, but I think it's also conditional as well, like how people are being treated. As I was talking about, the idea of that psychological experiment, the Milgram experiment, that's something that just happens because of certain conditions, so it's interesting stuff to look into. If you guys have time, check out the Milgram experiment. It's interesting to read about and see what happens. There's also the idea of like cognitive dissonance, this idea that, and the backfire effect, when you prove somebody wrong, and instead of them actually accepting that something is wrong, they double down and they do do it even worse, or they just continue to spread false information and bullshit because they just don't want to believe, that what they know is wrong. Uh-oh, I might need to do some surgery. His foot is huge. Let me zoom out. Yeah, that foot looks pretty big. I think it just needs to be longer. Ooh. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. There's at some point I'm gonna need to do some surgical adjustments. Maybe the guy who's holding hemlock needs to be a little bit closer to him, because I'm paying attention to the distance between something. I was talking about before, the distance between objects. So in the I'm gonna show you guys real quick before I end the stream. So this is the original, and you could see like his foot right here, right? Like it's touching his butt basically. But like going back here, that's not really the case. So either I have to extend the leg, or the space between them here and here is too short. Or just have to, I don't know. I have to look into it a little bit more, but next time, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed all this. I had a great time talking about all that stuff, sharing it with you guys, and painting it as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, just remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They're both greatly appreciated by me. And make sure you come back tomorrow for a special intro. Actually, there's going to be more new content coming your way. It's going to be something that's going to take up like, I don't know, a quarter of the stream. So I'm not going to reveal too much about it. I'm not going to talk about it too much. So make sure you tune in tomorrow to see what that is. And then also Friday, I'm going to be continuing on with Gil Elfgren's influences. I got 2 more artists to talk about, and then I'm going to show you guys more of the book. Show you Gil Elfgren's work going from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to 70s, all the way to the 70s, and just gets better and better every decade. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow.